if you're anything like me and you like to get to know yourself and to just sort of dig around in your inner world, it's interesting, right? It's interesting to think that, a lot of the problems that we have in our life and in our relationships, they are patterns. And then to get in there and to really look for the source and to shape it into this character, like it's another way also of externalizing problems that we have. Hi friends, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about a very popular therapeutic model called parts work. And maybe you've heard of this or seen it on social media because it's definitely gotten more popular in recent years, but there's still a lot of questions that are out there. Specifically, like, what is parts work and can it help me? And so today I just wanted to dive into really giving you some information on what it is. Like, what does it mean if a therapist is like, hey, do you want to do some parts work with me? What does it do for you? And then, if there's an interest that you find being sparked, I'll give you a few books that you can read. And then potentially you could work with a therapist to do some parts work. If it resonates with you and you think, wow, maybe this is something that I could benefit from. So really, parts work, it's a therapeutic lens that assumes that we have all these different parts, or you might call them sub-personalities, and each of these parts have different wants, needs, and beliefs. And so just right there, it's already a little weird. And sometimes it can just sound out there. Like, what do you mean you're saying I have these sub-personalities? And so one of the first things that will happen if you do start to do some parts work with a therapist or read a book is like a disclaimer that it's definitely not saying that we all have multiple personalities or dissociative identity disorder. It's not saying that. It's simply a way of starting to get to know different parts of yourself. And something that I've talked about quite a bit in the past is this ability to move out of an experience and out of an emotion and to step into the role of the observer. And so with parts work, if you think about what we're doing is we're taking different emotions that you have and different patterns and different experiences that are on repeat for you. And we're essentially turning them into characters and turning them into these different parts, giving them names, giving them ages, learning about them. And really, what are we doing? We're stepping out of the experience of those emotions to a place of observing. And when we do this, we're stepping into the logical part of our brain, or at least we're putting a foot into the logical part of our brain. And it gives us more of an empowered way of experiencing the strong emotions or the wants or the needs, the beliefs we have without getting carried away by them. So really the goal of doing parts work is to get to know ourselves better, really on a deep level, and then to increase the integration of our whole system. And so if you think about this, I love to talk about the hand model of the brain just because I find it so useful in how we understand our experience, not necessarily because it's super scientifically accurate, but because it's useful, right? And so the hand model of the brain is the top part of our brain is the cortex, and this is our logic and our, higher function. And then we can flip our lid if we get very emotional and our cortex goes offline. And so we lose the ability to be logical and to be, all of that intelligence, thinking about consequences. And we are then left with our mammalian emotional monkey brain, where we can experience very strong emotions. We can kind of lose our touch with time. So it kind of feels like this experience will be the rest of my life, right? We kind of go into this weird twilight zone. And so really, I think that what parts work is especially useful for, in my experience, is in really naming the different strong emotions that we can have when we're in this triggered state. Because if you think about it, the times that you get triggered, or the topics or the situations that trigger you to have strong emotions, you can find links between them. And so you will find that we all have patterns of emotion. And so when our lids get flipped and we have these strong emotions, whether it be anger or anxiety or sadness, whatever those strong emotions might be, we have patterns. And so really with parts work, we talk about we really want to keep our lid on, or we want to keep a foot or a toe here in the logical part of our brain so that we don't get completely taken over by the monkey brain, where we make horrible decisions and, do things that we end up regretting, right? And so with parts work, what we're doing is we're identifying the patterns of emotion and we're flushing them out into a character, right? We're starting to understand why. What's the why behind these strong emotions? And then what's the need and what's the belief, right? And so when we're doing this, we're not just caught up in the experience. We're, when we have the experience flare up, we're like, oh, that's Jane. And if you have a part of you that you've named Jane and you know exactly, oh, she's upset because of XYZ. Now, I realize this sounds kind of crazy, but just think about conceptually what we're doing. You've identified an emotional pattern. You have this understanding behind it. And for you to stop and say, oh, that's Jane, you've got to be using your prefrontal cortex. You are not getting fully swept away in the emotion of it. And so that's the key that I think makes this a powerful modality, is if you're someone who can get really taken away by these different patterns of emotion and you feel that you're losing control and that you don't have a way to keep yourself anchored and grounded in some logic, be able to experience both, feel this strong emotion, but then still be able to make some rational decisions, right? Because we're still keeping that lid on. This is a modality that can be fun, because it is kind of goofy and silly to start talking about, different parts of you as if it's a character and, you can have conversations with them. But when you see how it actually can be a practical tool to allow you to maintain a more control over your emotions and to not get swept away in this pattern or this way that you've always reacted, then it can really be beneficial. So parts work can really help us to defuse big emotional waves. And that is something that if you do experience big emotional waves, it can be a lifesaver to have this tool and to have this way of relating to your inner world. If you think about it, that's what we do with a lot of therapy, is like we're flushing out, we're uncovering, we're figuring out your inner world, which our inner world really impacts our outer world. It impacts our experience and how we show up in the world. And so this is a way, if you're like, hey, I do have these big, strong emotional waves that come over me and I kind of feel like I lose control, then, figuring out what part of you does that, what upsets this part, what does this part need? And this moves us into the next kind of benefit to parts work, and that is doing parts work really helps you to foster this almost parental role towards these different parts of yourself. Again, we want to be the observer. Well, in this scenario, we want to be the leader. You want to be that loving parent. And so when you start to feel, I'm getting triggered, I'm starting to have strong emotions, and now you're able to identify, oh, it's this part of me, and this part of me is about 8 years old and needs this, then you can step in with this more logical part of your brain to provide that, right? You know the need. Oh, this part's not feeling safe. Well, here you are, a grown adult. You can keep it safe, right? This is an irrational fear that you're reacting to, this part of you is reacting to. So it's just cool how if you do parts work for long enough, you can start to take on this, leadership role of your parts. And it can be a very, like a loving and nurturing part of you comes out that you get to then experience. Another thing about parts work is it really is kind of just fun and interesting. If you're anything like me and you like to get to know yourself and to just sort of dig around in your inner world, it's interesting, right? It's interesting to think that, a lot of the problems that we have in our life and in our relationships, they are patterns. And then to get in there and to really look for the source and to shape it into this character, like it's another way also of externalizing problems that we have, right? And this is a big therapeutic technique of, hey, I'm not the problem, right? Pulling it out away from you and looking at it here like, no, this part of me, doesn't feel safe in these situations. And that's what's going on. And this leads to the next one, which is I think that if you do parts work and really take it seriously, it really decreases shame, it decreases guilt, and allows you to not really blame yourself or to feel like I am the problem. And I think a lot of times when, life just gets too overwhelming and there's so many problems, and maybe, you're finally at a point where you're going to go in and see a therapist, and you go in for that first session and there's so much blame and shame and just feeling like I'm here because I'm a mess and I'm the problem. And when we're doing this parts work, it's an awesome way to just be able to pull it out from you. And it's like, no, it's this part. It's this one part of me. And here's how we're going to address it. And here's how we're going to help this part. And again, getting back into that like leadership role of, okay, I kind of need to manage all of these different parts, and it becomes a very different experience. And it's a very empowering experience of like, hey, I get to manage these parts and see them for what they are here and not identify that, that is me. Okay, so if this is interesting and has your wheels spinning a little bit, like, okay, maybe I want to start doing some digging and I want to find some parts. The first book that I'm going to recommend is called No Bad Parts. And this is by Dr. Richard Schwartz, or Dick Schwartz, wrote No Bad Parts. And that's a really good book to start with. I actually recommend the audio version because in the audio version, he takes you through exercises, which essentially, like if you did go to see a therapist to start doing parts work, they would have you do these different little exercises of exploring and starting to sort of flush out like, okay, what are my parts, and getting to know them. And so in the audio version, you can hear him walking you through the exercises and you can really do them. So if you're interested, I would definitely start with No Bad Parts. And even in the title of his book, he is saying there's no bad parts. And this is another way that parts work can really help to increase self-esteem, put down guilt and shame by really understanding that every single part of us has good intentions, right? And what's really interesting and powerful in the book, Dr. Schwartz talks about how he has worked with really serious criminals who have done, violent acts and horrible things. And he's done this parts work with them to get to know this part of them that was, the driving force behind the crimes that they committed. And even digging into those parts and finding the reasons why this part thought that was helping them as a whole. And so really realizing this idea that every part of me has my best intentions in mind, every part of you is doing their best, and helping each part of you with that, putting on the role of this loving parent who is going to help them to really line up what they do today with what really helps you. Because a lot of the parts are formed when we're younger, and the things that they did to help us in the past no longer help us in the present. And so really helping each of these parts kind of make that transition from these more extreme behaviors and emotions to present day life. Like, this is what's going to help us today so that we can be successful and happy. So this is interesting. I really do recommend reading or listening to Dr. Schwartz's book. And if you get through his book and you're still like, wow, this is cool, then I would highly recommend looking for a therapist who does parts work. It can be very fun. And really going back to the question is like, can parts work help you? From my experience as the therapist, parts work can kind of come up organically with a lot of my clients. And it can be really cool if your brain kind of works in that way. And then for other people, I can definitely say like it's just clunky and it doesn't feel right. So I think this is like a personal thing, but if it kind of gets your creativity going and your curiosity going, then I would recommend giving it a try, starting with the book. And then if you like it, then diving in with a therapist and looking at it as an exploration and a discovery mission to get to know the different parts of you better so that we can increase the integration of our whole system. So I hope that you found this interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and I will be back next week with another message. Take care.